Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Kroger. We are go for 2 and 22, back-to-back Dog National champions. Feels good to still be basking in the glow of that accomplishment. We are also final pre-recorded vacation show for me. That means on Monday, I am back from my cruise. Probably a little sad about that, but nonetheless excited about being here and doing the job that I love, talking Georgia football for you. But even though I'm gone, we're still going to do that here today. Really fun show. I'm going to stand on the table for Smael Mondon a little bit on today's show. Linebacker, I don't think he's getting enough attention. We'll talk about why that is and kind of what's going on with him. We'll have some fun with that. Also, 2024 class, kind of early preview for what's going to matter here this summer with that. I'm going to give you kind of like 5 names that I think are most important for Georgia in this class of 2024 and the kind of storylines that sort of propel the importance of those players. We'll do that. So we're just really happy to have you with us. By the way, Jeff Sentell joins us, and he'll obviously have plenty to say on that topic too. So good stuff. Glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So I think it was 2 Fridays ago we talked about on this show what might be the most underrated storyline for Georgia during this offseason. And we're going to kind of use the concept of underrated again today, but we're going to look, I think, a little bit more closely what I believe is an underrated player. There's a guy, and this is not like a nefarious thing, which is probably a bigger word than I should be using. There's nothing sinister at play here. No one's intentionally trying to hold him down. But I honestly don't think a lot of people realize how good Smael Mondon is. Georgia linebacker. Georgia's had great inside linebacker play for quite some time. It's often more than one inside linebacker who's playing at kind of a high level. In this past year, Jamon Dumas-Johnson kind of emerged in a big way. And we think justifiably so. JDJ, or they call him Pop, is a really, really, really good player. But it seems like a lot of people don't realize, Georgia fans I think do, but a lot of people don't realize that Smael Mondon is really, really good too. And I think there's very much a possibility that this year's linebacker core, Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Smael Mondon as your 2 starters, I think it's quite possible this linebacker core feels a good bit like what, say, Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean would have felt like for Georgia in that historic 2021 season when the defense was as good as probably anything's ever been. That this year's linebacker crop of Mondon and Jamon Dumas-Johnson might not have to take much of a step back in that overall comparison between those 2 groups. And yet, as we say that, we know full well that a lot of other folks are like, Mondon, who's that? Smael, who's that? They don't quite know that. Let me show you an example of this. Now, this is not a criticism of Pro Football Focus. I don't necessarily care much one way or another. I know Kirby's had his things to say about Pro Football Focus in the past. They've got their numbers to justify whatever decision they want to make here. But they put out their list the other day of the top 10 returning linebackers for college football for the upcoming season. Obviously, Jamon Dumas-Johnson is on the list, but Smael Mondon wasn't. I'll show it to you on the screen here. Jeremiah Trotter's number 1 from Clemson. You got Harold Perkins, who we obviously think is very good. Tommy Eichenberg from Ohio State. Barrett Carter from Clemson. We think he's good. Cedric Gray from North Carolina. Jalen Ford from Texas. Abdul Carter from Penn State. You got Mahima, is that Nongmeta? Is that how you say that? From Wisconsin. And then you got a guy from Missouri there as well, kind of rounding out the top 10. So you got, 10 linebackers returning here for this upcoming season, but Smael Mondon's not on the list. Now, let me ask you this. Would you trade, for those of you that watch college football very closely, how many of those linebackers would you consider trading for Mondon? I don't believe I would for any of them, even though some of those guys I think are really very good. I also think that Smael Mondon himself is really very good as well. And he kind of emerged in that spot last season, and now here in 2023, he gets a chance to be kind of a focal point of the Georgia defense. One of those things that people may not realize to begin the season, but they may really know by the time this season is done. And to hear Kirby Smart kind of explain how Mondon got to this role, one of the things that Smart says is, hey, even though that in 2022 he got way more playing time, at least at linebacker, than he got in 2021, the truth is even back at a time in which, Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean were playing as the starters at inside linebacker, Smart said last offseason he knew full well that Smael was a very good player because of one distinctive characteristic that made Mondon stand out from almost any player that Smart's ever coached before. This is good stuff from Kirby last year. Take a listen to this.
Smael Mondon is as good an athlete as I've seen. He has to increase his physicality, his toughness. He missed spring. because of a shoulder surgery, but he's put on some good solid weight. He's a really good athlete. He played a lot of snaps on special teams. Core linebackers get valuable experience on special teams before they're the feature guy.
So I think that's good stuff, and obviously some of what Jamon Dumas-Johnson did in 2021 is kind of the same way. But how about that from Kirby? One of the best athletes I've ever seen. Kirby's been at Georgia since 2016. He was at Alabama before that. That's a lot of good athletes that he's had a chance to see, and athletically he compares Mondon favorably with, as he said, anybody. That's one of the things that leads me to believe that there is something that Georgia and its fans know about Mondon that maybe some of the other folks around college football maybe just don't quite know to the extent they possibly could. And I'd say that Georgia fans have known this about Smael for quite some time. This is not one of those guys that has just sort of blossomed on the field. This is a guy who seemed to have that intent to want to do that even before he got to Georgia. There's a clip from an interview that he did with Jeff Sentell way back when he was a recruit. And keep in mind this. Kirby says, this is as good an athlete as I have seen. And yet when Jeff Sentell, when Smael was a recruit, once asked him about what it was that was going to give him a chance to thrive at Georgia and set himself apart at UGA from the moment that he arrived there, even though Smart praises Mondon's athleticism, Smael says it wasn't his athleticism that was going to set him apart from other guys. Once again, kind of understanding what makes Smael special, maybe the full package as a player. This is what Mondon told Jeff way back when Smael was still a recruit about how he planned on setting himself apart from the rest of the pack when it comes to being a linebacker at Georgia in the SEC, Smael as a recruit.
Somebody watches you play. What do you hope they pick up about what's important to you and what you work on to be great?
That I watch film, because like the game, I feel like it comes natural to me because of how much film I watch. So like I feel like I know what's gonna happen before it happens. So like I just have I'm a step ahead, I feel like.
So don't you love that? Kirby Smart says, hey, this is the best athlete I've ever seen, or at least he says, he certainly praises athleticism, as good an athlete as I've probably coached. And yet Mondon says, hey, I want you to know the fact that I watch film. I study the game. I learn. I grow from learning. And that's what he says as a recruit that sort of sets him apart. So once again, let's go back to the original premise. You got Kirby praising his athleticism. You got Smael kind of buying into the idea of really studying and being a student of the game. You think there are 10 better linebackers coming back in college football this year than that? I'm not quite so sure I do. And look, the one thing that we continue to kind of bump up against is the possibility that Georgia's defense in 2023 could be even better than it was in 2022. Now, we don't know if the team itself is going to be even better because Georgia was 15-0 this past season and a second straight national championship. Hard to be that good and way, way, way difficult to be even better than that. But defensively, it's at least possible because Mondon is now a year older, and Mondon could be, over the course of a 15-game season, getting ready to introduce himself to the country in a way that maybe they should already be acquainted with him, but he may do a lot to make sure they know who he is moving forward after this. Fun to think about that. He's not the only Georgia player kind of in that situation. There are a lot of guys who could be way more famous by the end of this calendar year than they are in the early stages of this calendar year right now, but I don't know that anybody is more underrated right now than Smael Mondon currently is. Georgia fans know it. He is really very good. Jamon Dumas-Johnson may have gotten more of the attention, but Mondon, especially during the college football playoff, was playing at such a high level, and the entire country may be aware of just how true that is by the time this season is done. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how. You get to us today live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, available as a podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, everything else in between. And back on Monday again, we'll start 9:45 for our first and 15. We'll do all that kind of stuff with you. We are just really excited about all of that. Appreciate you being with us here on these vacation weeks. Appreciate everybody, Michael Carvel, Kaylee Manziel, who worked so hard to help us record all of these. I'm so grateful for a great team here that allows me to do what I need to do so I can be on vacation next week. Of course, our DawgNation team, guys you do know, Jeff Sentell and Connor Riley, Mike Griffith also worked really hard, too, to be a part of this there, too. So we're going to put another week of pre-recorded shows in the book after this one today, and we're just thankful to have you a part of it. And, of course, a great sponsor like Kroger, a big part of all of this, too. Really appreciative of what they do for us there as well. And they got a great new thing for you. If you go to Kroger.com/sign-up on the web, you can find out how you can get registered there, on the app, online, to take advantage of some great digital coupons and get some big savings on all kinds of great stuff from Kroger using the digital products like the app, like the website. Kroger.com/signup gives you a lot more on that. So I hope you'll check that out today because, listen, Kroger's been a great ally for us a long time here, keeping food on our table and all that kind of stuff, but also finding a way to save money this time, sort of era of life that we're in. Figuring out a way to save money when you can is a very, very important thing. So Kroger.com/signup for a new way to save from our friends at Kroger, using the app, using the online experience on the website at Kroger.com, and you get registered for your chance to enjoy some big savings. So check that out with our friends at Kroger here today. All right, it's going to be Jeff Sentell here coming up in a moment. One of the things I'm going to talk to Jeff about, I want to set up right now as a part of Around the Dawghouse. So we are here sitting, near late February, relatively early still in the 2024 year, and I think it's time to start thinking about those recruiting topics that we're going to be hearing a lot about over the course of the next few months. And I want to do this by kind of giving you 5 names here. These, to me, are the 5 names that matter most when it comes to Georgia recruiting for the class of 2024. And my reason for picking these names, they're all very highly rated players, so that's, I guess, part of the reason. But my other reason for sort of picking these names here is because I think it kind of coincides with an important storyline, something we'll also spend a good bit of time talking about there as well. Number 1 on my list, probably not surprised, also the number 1 player in the country. It is the 5-star quarterback, Dylan Raiola. This is the most important recruit, I believe, to know for Georgia fans here in the class of 2024. It'll be interesting to see if Georgia wins this battle. It seems like Georgia's in a pretty good spot. It was interesting to me the other day when Raiola talked to Jeff Sentell about what he liked about UGA and listing the coaches that have kind of been influential on him. He did mention Mike Bobo pretty prominently in that, even though that was prior to Bobo being announced as Georgia's offensive coordinator. At the time, we didn't even know that Todd Monken was leaving. And yet already Raiola was talking a bit about Mike Bobo there at the time. So this is, I believe, the most important recruit to know for Georgia here this year. Of course, recently Jeff Sentell had a chance to speak to Raiola about what's next in his recruitment, his thought process, and to kind of keep this conversation going, let's let you hear from Dylan in his own words.
I think just the relationships and, just really seeing every school and what they have to offer. And for me, it really coming down to relationships. You can show winning, you can show scheme, but you can't fake being who you are and who you are all the time. So just really getting to know the coaches at each school that I'm looking at, and really just trusting my family.
How much will your first commitment experience shape your next one?
I think that's big. I'm lucky I get a second chance at it. I just want to be patient and really see what every school has to offer, and just make the best decision for me.
Georgia is obviously one of the schools you've thought about for some time. They were your first offer.
Yep.
How do you feel about them right now? Like, what has them in the mix?
Yeah, I think you got to start with the leader, Coach Smart. What he does for his program, for his players, the development he has. It's really just you can't beat what he does.
So I think that's really good from Raiola there, and the reason why he shows up on my list of most important recruits of this class of 2024 in so many ways based on the fact, and I'm going to talk to Jeff Sentell more about this in a moment, that when you look at some of the recent really high-profile recruiting wins that Georgia's gotten, Gunnar Stockton was an elite recruit, but there was also a little bit of a home field advantage for Georgia in that. When it comes to Brock Vandagriff, there was definitely a home field advantage for Georgia in that recruitment. Vandagriff was from Athens. He stated being closer to home is a big reason why he decommitted from Oklahoma when he did. Well, there is no home field advantage when it comes for Georgia and Raiola. We're in kind of this new age in which winning quarterback battles when it comes to recruiting seems to be a little bit complicated. Can Georgia do that in this age with a guy like Raiola? I think it's fascinating, and that's why he's on my list of most important recruits to know for the class of 2024. I'm going to give you 2 more here, both from the same team. Buford High School here in the Atlanta area. KJ Bolden, kind of an athlete, both sides of the ball type guy, probably a safety in college. Then Edric Houston, the outstanding defensive lineman that probably reminds you a little bit of Trayvon Walker if you've seen him before. Both these names show up on my list as well of most important recruits for Georgia in the class of 2024 too. And once again, there's a narrative that sort of pushes them onto that conversation for me, because we saw this maybe play out a year ago with Justice Haynes, or at least some Georgia fans assumed it played out this way, where Buford in that kind of area of Gwinnett County, very talent-rich part of our state, metro Atlanta area, Buford in that Gwinnett County area in particular being one of those spots where it seems like Georgia can be a a fixture in the mix for some of the players from a school like this, but ultimately has not won with a lot of players from a school like this. And yet here we are once again with Georgia, a major player in Houston's recruitment and Bolden's recruitment. And this may be finally the time that Georgia kind of kicks in the door in the class of 2024. In Gwinnett County, at Buford in particular, with elite recruits. Obviously, in the case of Houston, I think he's about as important for Georgia as anybody can be. I think that Bolden, in his own way, is really fun too. And to see if Georgia could win with these Buford high school prospects in a way that it kind of hasn't done in the past, and that area of Gwinnett County, frankly, kind of hasn't done very much in the past, that's one of the things that makes those recruiting battles pretty interesting. So far I've given you 3 names. Dylan Raiola, the quarterback from Arizona, KJ Bolden, Edric Houston, 2 very important players from Buford High School here in the Atlanta area. Now I'm going to give you Sammy Brown coming out of the Jefferson program. I think Sammy Brown as a linebacker is really interesting. First of all, Brown himself is just a really good player. But beyond that, can Georgia win with like great linebacker again after pulling C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson and Troy Bowles from the previous class? That is not easy to do, y'all. It just isn't. That's an amazing track record year after year after year. And yet Brown's another good one. It's another guy that I think Georgia really like to have. And I think that Brown, for everything I've understood, is certainly strongly considering Georgia too. But winning a linebacker with a linebacker like this after you just won with the trio that you won with a year ago, maybe as good a group as you've seen come in at one place at one time, not an easy thing to pull off, but Georgia has a habit and a history of being willing to do what's hard when it comes to recruiting, so we'll see how that plays out with Sammy Brown. And then I'll give you one more here, and this one may be kind of just for fun for me, but it's a guy that I watch closely because I think he's probably the most exciting player in the state. That is Mike Matthews out of Parkview. That's another one of those guys that kind of plays on both sides of the ball. I think that Matthews, as a wide receiver, as an offensive type guy, I think he's just fascinating. I really do. Mike Matthews has been just an electric player here in the state of Georgia, and I believe he will be for this upcoming season too. I think that's a tough recruiting battle, but it's one that's fun, and it's one I'd love to see Georgia win. So I'll put him on my list there as well. So that's my 5. The 5 that matter the most for the upcoming class: Dylan Raiola, KJ Bolden, Edric Houston, Sammy Brown, Mike Matthews. And, of course, I'm guessing that between now and the end of this recruiting cycle, we talk about them plenty right here on DawgNation Daily. For now, though, something I want to talk about with you is something we also talk about each week around here, and that is our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Now, normally on Fridays we do our Big Finish. This week doing things just a little bit different. I want to give a shout-out to them for what they do. Of course, I'm at the beach and enjoying some time on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, and when I'm doing all that kind of stuff, being outside, the pool, everything else, it gets me thinking about the Finish Long Drink because it always tastes great when you're doing something like that. So if you haven't tried some, this is a great time to do it. There's 4 different varieties. There's a long drink cranberry, long drink strong, which is 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, the traditional, as I said before, blue can, the citrus flavor, the gin kick. It's just a really, really enjoyable experience. And so if you go to thelongdrink.com, you put in your zip code, you can find out the story about how it all got started back in Finland, Helsinki, in the 1950s when the Summer Games were on hand, and then been in America now the last couple of years. And now in Georgia, and pretty much wherever you are, you can find some. So go to thelongdrink.com and find out where you can pick up some today. That is thelongdrink.com, and you can pick up some Finish Long Drink here today. All right, before we're done, pretty fun look about what the future of the SEC might look like. Now, sooner rather than later, we'll do that. We'll get ready to wrap up here on a Friday, but all kinds of good stuff as it relates to UGA recruiting. Jeff's own thoughts about his 2024 prospects to watch. And as we addressed earlier this week, some of those incoming freshmen that could be making a pretty big impact. Jeff's got a lot to say about that too. So let's cover all of that right now with Jeff Sentell. Glad to have him and all of you as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Final vacation show for me, which means I'm sad about leaving my wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, but always happy to get a chance to talk to our recruiting insider, Jeff Sentell. Good to have him in the program, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Jeff, we appreciate your time here today. And one of the things we've tried to do here this week is kind of set the stage for what's next for Georgia. Obviously, the 2024 cycle kind of kicking into gear here. And, Georgia already sits as the number 1 class in the country for this 2024 recruiting cycle and has a really good chance to stay there and really have a chance, I believe, to become kind of a historic class for Kirby Smart and this Georgia team in many ways. But let's kind of take the snapshot here for a moment. If I give you the floor and say, hey, who are the most important recruits for Georgia in the class of 2024? And you can include guys who are already committed, but obviously fans also interested in those uncommitted names there as well. Who is the small handful of recruits that you believe kind of matter most for Georgia here in this 2024 cycle?
Good one. Good topic there. Brandon, I obviously have to go with quarterbacks because Georgia didn't take a quarterback in the 2023 cycle. Everybody knows about that and well documented. And then probably one of the three quarterbacks that are currently in Athens won't be around by the time the 24 season rolls around. You're probably going to look for some separation or also some dilution of the current talent pool there. So I'll give quarterbacks. I think Ryan Puglisi is a big name here. I think he's a top 5 talent in the country at quarterback, and the type of guy that Georgia fans would be thrilled to have in any year, in any cycle, no matter who's doing the recruiting. But I think Georgia needs to go for 2, and that's why Dylan Raiola jumps in here as well. Number 1 quarterback in the country, number 1 prospect in the country. He's got ties to Matthew Stafford. His dad played 14 years in the league with one team for the Detroit Lions. He's built right. Got all the physical gifts. If somebody wants to argue he is this talented, perhaps the most talented quarterback prospect to come out since one Trevor Lawrence. Probably be nodding my head in the corner, might even be saying amen to that. But I think it's that. I think it's 2 or 3 more names. I think it's 5-star defensive lineman Edric Houston out of Buford High School. I just simply put, I think he's the type of guy that should be an All-American for Georgia and also be a guy that's a team captain for a lot of big games and also show up at SEC Media Days. He's got that kind of good stuff on the field, off the field, and inside the locker room. I think 1 or 2 of the names, Brandon, they're already in the class, and I think that's Ellis Robinson, the number 1 cornerback in the country, a 5-star cornerback out of IMG Academy. That pipeline usually creates ready to roll and ready to go Georgia Bulldogs. I think Peyton Woodyard out of St. John Bosco in California is another example of national recruiting at an elite level. He has a close family relationship, with Dylan Raiola as well. Those 2 guys have gotten to know each other a lot over the 2024 recruiting class. I think those are really the big standout names for me. And another one, Brandon, this will be one that I just everybody wants to put in the back of their pocket a little bit. Sokovie Hollywood White out of Northwest Georgia Cass High School. There's just something special about that guy. A lot of the things that made Hines Ward special, just a pure football player. He could be a DB, he could be a wide receiver, he could be a gadget guy. I think he is going to make a cornucopia of plays for the Dogs. He still loves where he's at with the Dogs despite all the offensive coordinator changes. And one last name, Brandon, he is recently committed. And I don't think he got enough attention or enough hoopla placed on his name. But let me tell you this guy has an Olympic gold medalist for a father. He has an 8-time NCAA All-American track standout for a mother. He has ran a 10.43 in the 100 meters when he doesn't even really run track at all. And he has already clocked a 4.28 in the 40. That was laser. That was timed at Georgia. And it was a very poor, ugly-looking 4.28 according to his dad. Brandon, we've never seen a running back come into Georgia with quite that athletic background as well as that athletic resume. I'm talking about Dwight Phillips Jr. out of Pebblebrook High School. Brandon, that is ludicrous, insane, Spaceballs kind of speed.
Ludicrous speed.
And that will be a fun toy to deal with.
That is very funny. Let me talk about Dylan here for a minute since you brought him up. And first of all, we've had some off-air conversation about this. While it looks like it should be Raiola, the family says Raiola. Is that correct?
Correct, Brandon.
Raiola.
Probably think about your favorite bread. Yeah, think about your favorite bread or your favorite pour.
Sure.
And start thinking about that. You got to get that mnemonic in there to get the names right. But, man, he can spin it. I got to see him work out with my own eyes recently in Arizona. He was winging the ball. The ball was cutting through there. A lot of toughness to him, too, Brandon. Nobody knows this, but, he didn't get a lot of juice out of his junior year, at least like no incredible highlights. His stats actually dipped. We learned later on that he was playing with multiple injuries that he never disclosed, and he just played through because that's what the son of an NFL center that I think started every game he played in the NFL and only missed like 4 or 5 games in a 14-year career playing offensive line for the Detroit Lions. got that internal grit, that internal fortitude that you'd love to see also in a potentially five-star, number one prospect in the country, future NFL draft pick type quarterback.
So along those lines, I think what's interesting about Dylan here is that it's an example for Georgia to kind of show, can it go out and win the big national recruiting battle for a quarterback? Because on the one hand, people say, well, Georgia's got five-star quarterbacks and highly rated prospects. But the truth is, the fact that it was close to home, as he's told you many times, played a big role in Brock Vandagriff's decision to come here. That's a five-star that came here because of proximity. And I think, after the Mike Bobo thing kind of fizzled out at South Carolina, all of a sudden Gunnar Stockton, I think, looked at Georgia as sort of the hometown choice there too. That was not a composite five-star at the end of his recruiting process, but a guy that was, I still think, ranked, the top 40 prospect, somewhere along those lines. A very, very highly rated quarterback prospect. Once again, an example where proximity probably helped Georgia. So some of these recruiting wins at quarterback for Georgia have come with a little bit of a home field advantage to them. But you didn't have that with Arch Manning, and ultimately Georgia didn't quite win that recruiting battle. It's been a little while here since we've seen Georgia kind of go out and win the big national battle for a quarterback here. And that's one of the things that I think is going to make the Raiola recruitment kind of interesting, is because we're in an NIL age where these kinds of battles seem tougher than they've ever been before. And seeing how Georgia performs on this stage, I think, is going to kind of be interesting in comparison to the family connection to Nebraska, the sort of national sizzle of a USC, obviously a program that has a great history of recruiting quarterbacks. That, to me, is one of the things that makes this Raiola recruitment so interesting this year.
That's very interesting. I think one of the things that makes things different right now is everybody wonders, those quarterbacks are going to take huge money and huge dollars to sign NIL, but you have here a family that's really not interested in NIL, and they're kind of the son of an NFL, longtime 14-year NFL veteran, where, they're not looking for this payday to set the family up. And, it's not just a singular decision. I mean, the things that they talk about, they say they want development and they want relationships. And I think those are key areas for Kirby Smart. You want to throw in the national recruiting for a quarterback with proximity. You can also talk about Justin Fields out of Harrison as well. That's one that Georgia won, where proximity, location also played a factor as well. Perhaps, the only one that, Georgia's gotten that wasn't related to proximity at quarterback, you look at Carson Beck. People don't really remember Carson's recruiting that well, but at one time he was committed to Alabama, and then after he committed to Georgia, Alabama still came hard in the paint trying to get Carson Beck to flip before they eventually moved on to Bryce Young. And that was one that Georgia won out of Jacksonville, Florida, Mandarin High School, where, it seems like Georgia, but it just seems like Georgia, Brandon, to be frank, is just more of a national program now. They've got the championships. They have recency bias in their favor, but they also have a historical timestamp where Georgia seems to be ascending and elevating, whereas maybe a 2019 LSU, obviously sailed off after their championships. I mean, to me, when I think about how in the world Georgia ascends and gets on a whole new level and becomes an even stronger program and plays better football in the years to come, I think it involves getting those national five-star recruits like a Dylan Raiola, like a Deuce Robinson. I think adding more of those players to the mix on that side of the ball is going to make Georgia even better than it has shown so far in the last 2 or 3 years.
And another thing we've kind of talked about a little bit this week, and this is kind of, in your wheelhouse very much there as well, folks looking forward to some of those impact freshmen for this upcoming season. These are guys that you just got finished recruiting, or I should say covering on the recruiting trail. Now, I'm going to say this in loving kindness, Jeff. You can't give me everybody, because giving me everybody is the same thing as giving me nobody. But if I were to ask you to look for that small handful of 2023 signees that have the best chance of making the biggest impact in year one at Georgia, who makes that list for you?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like I'm trying to outthink your question, but the first one I'm going to go with was what my answer was a year ago, Brandon. That was Brett Thorson and the specialist. Well, I'm going to think about Peyton Woodring this year. Now, we recently saw on social media where Jared Zirkle, in a little bit of surprise, decided he was going to run it back. He was going to come back for another season in Athens, but, not an established starter as either the kickoff guy or the field goal specialist for Georgia. Those are things that Peyton Woodring is definitely very savvy and very skilled at. Very strong kickoff leg. Probably going to have the strongest kickoff leg we've seen in Athens, maybe since ever. I know nobody wants to talk about kickers because I've already used my kicker quotient there, trying to sound smart. But I really think, when you start looking at the guys that can really make an instant impact and a certain impact, Brendan, I think it's Jordan Big Baby Hall. That's a guy that, to me, has Barry Alexander plus vibes going into his true freshman season. He has Michael Williams, because I literally saw him in San Antonio, Texas at the All-American Bowl, Brandon, doing a lot of things that Michael Williams did the year prior before he started tearing up the SEC as a freshman on the way to leading Georgia in sacks. The other handful of names, Brandon, the linebacking group is so stout. Georgia's going to look like unfair, cheat codish, I guess, on special teams with guys like Raylan Wilson and Troy Bowles and C.J. Allen getting their reps really early on the special teams, while Smael Mondon and Jamon Dumas-Johnson really kind of man down and kind of handle the starting linebacker duties for a while. I like all of those names. The one name in the recruiting class, Brandon, I know you're going to feel like I'm hedging here, but rather than picking one of those interesting, sizzling receivers and young receivers like a Tyler Williams or a Yazzie Haynes, I really think Dominic Lovick, Brandon, is coming to Georgia to transfer out of Missouri to play 1 year and then get drafted in the first or second round going to the NFL. I think he's a year away, a strong year away from being that type of being that type of playmaker in the NFL. He's just got great short space quickness. He made plays at Missouri. Actually came from Luther Burden's old high school, Brandon, if that will jog a memory for you right there. I think those are the names in the 2023 class that I think are going to really impress people really quickly out of the gate for the Dogs in 2023.
So let me give you two addendums to that. Now, I wanted you to give me your name, so I'm not saying you gave me the wrong names. I just think it's kind of interesting here. The two names that you didn't hear that I think are pretty important for Georgia, at least they I think they should be. One of those is Damon Wilson. I think that Georgia needs an upgraded pass rush. Sounds like Wilson may be a little bit more polished right now in terms of just arriving on campus than the Sam Mpemba might be, but I'd like to see Georgia get more sacks this year. I think a guy like, Damon Wilson has a chance to kind of give that to you. And another name, although I'm not quite so sure how much he plays, I just think he's important, that's Monroe Freeling. Jeff, one of the things that concerns me a little bit is, and we can make this kind of quick, but, Georgia's probably got less established offensive tackle depth than it's had in the program in the past. And, you move a guy like Ernest Green seemingly as a starter, obviously Marius Mims on the other side, but your backup tackles right now I think are a total mystery, which gives Freeling an opportunity, but also kind of a necessity that a guy like that kind of steps onto campus sort of ready to go and ready to compete and ready to be standing in the wings in the event that either Green or Mims were to get hurt.
Yeah, I love that answer, Brendan, because number one, you look at Freeling, and he's a guy to me that 2023 is going to be his baptism year, so to speak, where he's going to get stretched out like he does with his yoga principles and practices he gets from his mom all the time. I think for me, 2024 is a year where you're expecting Monroe Freeling to step in and maybe start, because you look at Georgia's offensive tackle situation there, and it's not going to get any better after the 2023 season, my man, because Marius Mims is going to spend 1 year as a starter and then go get picked in the first round. And then you go, Ernest Green, yeah, maybe, but he's coming off back surgery right now. And then you start going, okay, true offensive tackles coming in, and you go, ooh, the cover gets a little bit bare. Now, of course, Xavier Truss could play tackle in 2023, but not for 2024. And, those are guys where the tackle guys are going to be a lot of combo guys, the guys that could play either guard or tackle. And the other name I thought you were going to burn me on that I thought would be a very acceptable answer, Brandon, I think Damon Wilson's going to get, going to do good things for Georgia, but I wonder how much quickly he'll be able to close the gap of a year between guys like Marvin Jones Jr.
Sure.
and also Darius Smith, who I think has a tremendous future in Athens somewhere.
Yeah.
Because they don't build bodies like that. Even in Kirby Smart's depth charts, they don't. The other name, and I would call him a pick to click that probably needs to be mentioned, is I'm looking at that safety spot, and I'm looking at a physical, fast guy that can come in and make some instant impact, kind of like Malachi did, and I'm looking squarely at the Massachusetts native Janelle Aguero there as well, Brandon. There's something about that guy. He's wired different. He's built different. Coaches have had their eye on him for some time because of the way he plays the game. He's physical. He's fast. He's relentless. And I think, one of the things that Kirby Smart wants to talk about core principles for the program. Well, core principles for his defense is that physical, resilient, tough, very fast, will strike you. I think Jonell Aguero's a guy, considering where Georgia's at safety and how thin that is also as well. I think Jonell's a guy that will probably play right away and might find himself playing a lot by midseason.
Fun answers, Jeff. Appreciate your time. The next time we speak, it'll be live again here next Friday, so I'm excited about that. Thanks for being on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and we will look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, my friend.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Boy, what a fun week this has been. Good stuff from Jeff Sentell there on a couple of topics that we know are near and dear to his heart. 2024 names, no. We're kind of really in the midst of that 2024 recruiting cycle here right now. Georgia's already a lot of hay in the barn, number one class. And yet when you start thinking about, some of the rest of what's going to go down there, interesting to hear perspective from Jeff on that to go along with some of the stuff that we've already had to say here today. And, of course, you also think about some of those big recruiting wins of the class of 2023 who might make their impact on the field here this fall. That is a really good thing to think about, too. So great stuff from Jeff Sentell on all of that. Speaking of great stuff, I am assuming for me it has been a great time on board Wonder of the Seas for my cruise. And I'm also knowing as I speak to you here on this Friday, that cruise is about to come to an end, which is bittersweet for me because on the one hand, you hate to say goodbye to a great vacation, but on the other hand, that means that the next time I speak to you in this spot, it'll be live. I can tell you about all the fun that I did have, and obviously we'll be back having the same conversation that we've always had, and I'll be looking forward to all of that. And then guess what? When I get back, I know it's going to be only a few more weeks until I'm back on a Royal Caribbean cruise again, this time for the DawgNation cruise. Of course, Jessica Slater has been helping us out with all that. Great travel agent, specialties selected for us by Royal Caribbean. You can call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She's a real person. You can talk to her. Whatever cruise questions you have about the fun we're having on board Royal Caribbean or the DawgNation cruise in particular, RoyalDogs.com, the place to go for that. That is RoyalDogs.com. So we're going to be on a 4-night cruise. We're leaving out of Port Canaveral. I love Port Canaveral because kind of a short drive, from where we are here in the Atlanta area, easy, convenient to get to, really kind of nice, kind of make a fun experience out of it. Just down the road from Orlando, which my family, we kind of enjoy going there. So you kind of have all of that experience. You get set up, you get ready for a great time. And that's what the DawgNation cruise is going to be all about. Many of you have kind of made plans on that, and there's been a lot of chatter lately about all the stuff that's going to be going on board the ship. Can't wait for all of that, and really, really excited to be about a part of all that with you, too. And by the way, you can also, when you're talking to Jessica, you can also get fully acquainted, too, with Icon of the Seas. Now, Icon of the Seas is a brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship concept that debuts in January of 2024. Some of the video that we show you that video, a lot of what we're showing you is that concept art for what Icon of the Seas is going to look like, completely reimagining what cruise vacations are all about. And you should find out about that. Make your plans for what January of 2024 is going to look like when Icon of the Seas is rolled out for the very first time. That's going to be a great experience. All right. That said, let's get ready right now to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, over the course of the last 5 days, Friday plus the 4 days here this week, one of the things that I have done is I have talked about like one big question for each SEC team. So we got one more day of shows left before I'm back live there on Monday, reacting to the news as it happens. And so I kind of want to cheat on this a little bit and now kind of bring in the other two SEC teams that aren't here now, but will be here in 2024, and sort of look at a couple of big questions as it relates to Texas and Oklahoma and their eventual arrival in the SEC. Here's what I think is interesting about Texas and Oklahoma here this year. They are playing one final time in what is kind of a lame duck edition of the Big 12, and this is going to be a weird Big 12 because you got the old teams still in there, Texas and Oklahoma for one last year. You got the new teams coming in too, the UCFs, the Cincinnati teams like that. So the Big 12 is going to feel a little different, a little bit weird here for this upcoming season. But I think you would stand to say, especially for a team like Texas, which on paper would appear to be better than Oklahoma would appear to be right now, this is sort of one final time to take advantage of a clearer path to the playoff that might exist when you get to the SEC. Now, I say might here because while undoubtedly both Texas and Oklahoma are moving into tougher leagues, they will also be doing so at a time when the playoff is expanding. And, right now you have to basically go undefeated, win the Big 12 to make the playoff, whereas in the SEC, hey, given the way the 12-team playoff is going to work, you don't necessarily have to win the league or even make the conference championship game to make the playoff. There may be room for, like, say, 3 SEC teams in the playoff. So it's not obvious that there's a more clear path for Texas or Oklahoma this year than there will be in the future, but it certainly stands to reason they probably will be, just because of the nature of who you're competing against in the Big 12. After all, the Big 12 team in this year's playoff, TCU, Georgia beat them 65-7 in the national championship. That's sort of all you need to know about the comparison between the two leagues right now. So wouldn't it be interesting if a team like, because it sort of feels like it's more like a Texas than an Oklahoma because of where the two programs are, but wouldn't it be interesting if one of these two teams were to be able to do something really big in the Big 12 on their way out the door and brought with them some steam into the SEC? Because as it stands right now, it's not obvious that either one of these two teams is going to be able to do that. Brent Venables' first year at Oklahoma was not good. Maybe it's better this upcoming year. In the case of Texas, it's the long-standing joke of, Texas is back, and yet they never really quite are. Maybe this is one of those years where, given the overall talent level of the Longhorns, which is pretty high, compared to who they're competing with for one more year in the Big 12, advantage Texas in most situations, although they were a big favorite in the game a lot of times last year and couldn't find a way to win the game. But wouldn't it be kind of interesting if both Texas or Oklahoma kind of brought a little bit of momentum with them into the SEC? And, I think we've all kind of made our peace with the fact that the SEC is not really a geographic league anymore. The notion of the Southeastern Conference, a lot of this league doesn't exist in the Southeast anymore. But if that's going to be true, what's happening for you kind of west of the Mississippi's got to matter here. And this league has a chance for some burgeoning rivalries out there. Obviously, Arkansas doesn't like the Texas teams. That's a big deal for them. Texas, Oklahoma, you're kind of bringing that rivalry into this league. Texas A&M kind of back again. It's all kind of mattering. But to make that westernmost portion of the SEC matter as much as it could, Texas and Oklahoma being as good as they possibly can is clearly a way in which all that would be made easier. So seeing what they can do to maybe feast for one more year in a pretty watered down Big 12 compared to what they'll see in the SEC, that could be interesting. Now, to kind of wrap up all of this, I want to kind of give you some very early predictions. These aren't full-fledged predictions, and there's a chance I might kind of change my mind. I sort of already feel like I've changed my mind here a little bit over the course of the last few weeks, but here are my kind of early predictions on where things stand here for right now. I believe in 2023, the SEC East is likely to play out almost exactly like it did this past season, where a team like Tennessee is not good enough to beat Georgia, but they could be good enough to beat everybody else. In other words, when you get to November, I believe more likely than not that Georgia-Tennessee in Knoxville still feels like a very big game. I think that Tennessee will be kind of a little bit of a replica of what it was this year, albeit with a different quarterback. And Georgia will kind of be a little bit of a replica of what it was this past year, albeit with some new players and some sort of new faces there as well. And that, once again, it is probably likely true for now that while Tennessee is good enough to make the game feel big, it is not good enough to actually do much when it actually plays Georgia. And my guess is that Georgia wins easily against Tennessee. And in the final year of the SEC East, it kind of runs through this division and really takes advantage of a time in which Georgia, on paper, is just magnitudes better than almost every team that it plays, and certainly every team in its own division, Tennessee included, although the Vols will probably have a pretty high ranking next to their name. On the other side, the SEC West, this is where I'm probably going to leave myself some wiggle room to kind of change my mind, because I think my knee-jerk reaction at the immediate conclusion of this past season is, well, Alabama was out of the mix here this year, but probably back in the mix next year. But I think if a lot of people have kind of brought this up to me, and I think they make a fairly decent point about this. Why is that automatically just sort of assumed to be true? As I told you earlier this week, when you watched LSU beat Alabama this past year, did you see that looking like a fluke? I don't believe that I did. Now, I also would say that while LSU-Alabama, the comparison there is somewhat intriguing, I don't believe I give a third team in the SEC West any chance of winning. Not Hugh Freeze in year one at all. There's just not much of a roster there. Not Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher. Insert your own joke there on that point, I guess. There's really no one else capable of making a competitive push at LSU or Alabama, I don't believe. But it's also not one of those things where I think it obviously needs to be true that Alabama just sort of takes it back from LSU because that's what it wants to do. takes a quarterback to be able to do that. I'm not sure Alabama's got one. LSU may have two quarterbacks better than anything currently on the Alabama roster. And it's going to take Alabama trying to get back to some roots that were once present that made that program what it was, but just flipping the switch and saying, hey, we want to go back and be tough again. We want to go back and play defense again. We want to go back and run the football again. Listen, it takes more than just waving a magic wand to make any kind of those things true. So leaving some room for me to reserve the right to change my mind, I believe my early prediction is Georgia, LSU again in the SEC championship. Now, these kind of rubber stamp rematch games almost never turn out to be true, and I'm sure that really for both sides, Georgia included, there'll be some mystery and intrigue baked into the cake of the story of the season at some point in time. Seems likely that might happen. But as of now, I think the safest bet for the SEC championship this upcoming year, Georgia, LSU again, in the final year of divisions, the SEC championship, as we've understood it, two teams that we've seen play, 5 times previous? They may be playing again, so we'll keep that in mind. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we say goodbye to you here one final time, appreciate you, of course, all being with us. Appreciate Kroger for being a great sponsor for us, and they gave away a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation a few days ago, but also their sponsorship, their partnership with us here, something we are certainly grateful for, and take some time to say thanks to them on all of that. Back on Monday again, live show, golden shoes, all the fun stuff that we've come to enjoy, and of course continuing to do our Gator Hater Countdown there as well. Now that's something we can also do for you here right now there too. 246 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating up on those lousy stinking Gators. I will tell you, one of the toughest challenges of the pre-recorded show is making sure you've got the math correct and what the Gator Hater Countdowns are going to be each day. I think we've probably been right on that this week, but if not, we'll come back and correct it there on Monday. Hey, y'all have a great weekend. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. Let me just say this here real quick. I truly, genuinely appreciate you supporting our show, showing up and being a part of what we do here. It gives me the freedom to be away for a week, which I don't take for granted. I know so many of you probably feel like, man, I need a vacation too, and I hope you get one. I really, really do. And I am so thankful that you've allowed me to be able to enjoy this vacation time right now, because much like you would say, I'm sure about yourself, I just sort of feel like I need it. I think our family felt like we needed it. And so we are very grateful that we've been able to have this experience. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for, watching the pre-recorded shows, being a part of all of this. And I can't wait to be back with you live on Monday. It's the best thing about my life, and I truly believe this, is that as much fun as I have being on vacation, having fun and doing that kind of stuff, I love the fact that when you're driving back from the cruise port or you're doing whatever else, there's this sense of excitement and this anticipation about being back, sitting in this chair again, doing the show that I love to do. I really, really appreciate the atmosphere that you've helped create around the show that makes it so much fun for me to do it each and every day. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I genuinely mean that. Thank you. And I'll tell you to check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Water heater, if it goes out in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. Air conditioning unit, go ahead and start thinking about getting that tuned up. Factory fresh specs, ready to go for the spring, the summer. $99 is all it costs. You can stay nice and cool here this warm weather season that's on its way. rsandrews.com for more on that there as well. You'll have a great, great weekend. Back here live on Monday. Looking forward to doing that with you. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then.